Stop scrolling right now and imagine this for a second. What if the love story you thought was perfect was actually built on silence, misunderstandings, and moments that almost broke everything apart? What if the smiles you saw on screen were hiding storms behind the scenes? Stay with this story until the very end, because what you are about to read will change the way you see love, growth, and second chances forever. And if you believe in real connections, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There was a time when the names Dylan, Wang, and Shen Yue felt like magic whenever they were mentioned together. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, effortless, and unforgettable, the kind that made people believe in love without asking questions. Their scenes felt real, their smiles felt genuine, and their connection seemed unshakable. But what many people never saw was the quiet tension that slowly began to grow beneath the surface. At first it was small, almost invisible, a missed conversation here, a misunderstood look there, moments that could easily be ignored, but as time passed those small cracks began to widen, turning into something heavier, something harder to ignore, something that neither of them truly knew how to fix. During one of their filming days, the atmosphere changed in a way no one could explain. The cameras were rolling, the lights were perfect, but something felt off. Dylan delivered his lines with intensity, but Shen Yue seemed distant, her usual warmth replaced with hesitation, and though the scene was completed, the silence that followed spoke louder than any dialogue. People around them noticed it, but no one said anything, because sometimes the strongest connections are also the most fragile, and no one wanted to be the one to break what still looked beautiful from the outside. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between them became more noticeable. Their conversations became shorter, their laughter less frequent, and the natural flow they once had started to feel forced, like two people trying to hold on to something that was slowly slipping away. There was one moment that changed everything, a scene that required deep emotion, vulnerability, and trust, the kind of scene that once came naturally to them, but this time it was different. As they stood facing each other, something unspoken filled the space between them, something heavy, something unresolved. Dylan paused, just for a second, but it was enough to break the rhythm. Shen Yue looked at him, her eyes searching for something that was no longer clear, and in that moment the director called for a break. What happened next was not loud, there were no dramatic arguments, no raised voices, just a quiet conversation away from everyone else, a conversation that had been waiting to happen for a long time. They spoke honestly, maybe for the first time in a while, about the pressure, the expectations, the misunderstandings that had slowly built walls between them. Dylan admitted that he had been overwhelmed, trying to meet expectations while losing sight of what truly mattered. Shen Yue shared how she felt unheard at times, how the connection they once had started to feel distant and uncertain. It was not easy, and it was not quick, understanding never is, but in that moment something shifted, not perfectly, not instantly, but enough to open a door that had almost been closed. The next few days were different, not magically fixed, but intentional. They started listening more, not just hearing words but understanding feelings. They gave each other space when needed, and support when it mattered most. And then came the scene that no one expected to feel so real. It was a quiet moment in the story, not filled with dramatic lines or intense action, just two characters sitting together, sharing a simple conversation, but this time something was different. The emotions were not forced, the connection was not rehearsed, it was real, raw, and deeply felt. Dylan looked at Shen Yue in a way that spoke of understanding, not just acting, and Shen Yue responded with a softness that carried both strength and forgiveness. It was the kind of moment that could not be created, only lived. When the director called cut, there was silence again, but this time it was not heavy, it was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes after something important has been repaired. From that point on, everything began to change, not in a perfect way, but in a real way. Their chemistry returned, stronger than before, because it was no longer based only on ease, but on effort, respect, and understanding. People watching their scenes noticed it too. There was a depth that had not been there before, a sincerity that made every moment feel more powerful, more meaningful, more unforgettable. What made their story truly remarkable was not that they never had problems, but that they faced them, that they chose to understand instead of walking away, that they turned a breaking point into a turning point. Because the truth is, the most beautiful connections are not the ones without struggles, they are the ones that survive them. And as their journey continued, both on and off the screen, they carried that lesson with them in every scene, every interaction, every shared moment, a reminder that understanding is not something that happens automatically, it is something that is built, protected, and chosen again and again. So if you have ever felt like something important in your life was slipping away, if you have ever faced misunderstandings that seemed too big to fix, remember this story, remember that even the strongest bonds can be tested, but they can also be rebuilt. And now this is where you come in. Do not just read this and move on, take a moment and think about the connections in your own life, the ones that matter, the ones worth fighting for, the ones that may just need a little more understanding and a little more patience. After that honest conversation, something quietly shifted between Dylan Wang and Shen Yue, not in a perfect or instant way, but in something more real, something more grounded. They were no longer trying to pretend that everything was fine, they were finally choosing to understand each other, to listen with patience, and to respond with care instead of distance. The days that followed carried a softer energy, their conversations became more open, their presence more intentional, and the tension that once lived between them slowly began to fade, not because it disappeared on its own, but because they faced it together, step by step, moment by moment. There was a calmness in the way they interacted now, a quiet effort in every word and every pause, and even when small misunderstandings appeared, they did not allow them to grow into something bigger, they addressed them, they talked through them, and in doing so, they began to rebuild something stronger than what they had before. During another filming day, a simple scene turned into something unforgettable, not because of perfect acting, but because of the truth behind it. Dylan looked at Shen Yue with a sense of clarity and sincerity that had been missing before, and Shen Yue responded with a warmth that carried both trust and understanding, and in that moment, it no longer felt like two people playing roles. It felt like two people who had found their way back to each other. What made that moment powerful was not what was said, but what was felt, the kind of connection that only comes after facing challenges, after choosing to stay when it would have been easier to walk away, and that silent understanding became the foundation of everything that followed. Behind the scenes, their bond continued to grow, they spoke more openly about their thoughts, their fears, and the pressure they had both been carrying, things they once kept hidden, and in sharing those parts of themselves, they created a space where both of them felt seen, heard, and valued. There were still moments where they did not fully agree, moments where things were not completely easy, but the difference now was how they handled it. They no longer let silence take control, they chose patience, they chose communication, and most importantly, they chose not to give up on each other. One evening, after a long and exhausting day, they sat together again in silence, but this time, it was not heavy or uncertain, it was calm, almost comforting, a silence that felt safe, and in that quiet moment, Dylan admitted that he had almost walked away, not from the work, but from the connection they once shared. Shen Yue listened carefully, and instead of reacting with hurt, she understood, because she had felt the same doubt, that same quiet fear of losing something that once felt so strong, but instead of letting that fear define their story, they chose to face it, to rise above it, and to hold on. That choice became everything, the moment where their story truly changed direction, not because it erased the past, but because it gave meaning to it. It showed them that what they had was worth the effort, worth the patience, and worth fighting for. As time went on, their connection became stronger, deeper, and more genuine, built not on perfection, but on trust, understanding, and the lessons they learned through their struggles, and that depth began to reflect in everything they did. Every scene, every glance, every shared moment carried a sincerity that could not be faked. People began to notice the difference. There was something more powerful in their presence, something more real, because it was no longer just chemistry, it was understanding, and understanding gave their connection a strength that could not be easily broken. What makes their story meaningful is not that they avoided problems, but that they faced them, that they chose to understand instead of walking away, and that they turned a moment that almost ended everything into a chance to build something even stronger. So if you are listening to this right now, take a moment and think about the connections in your own life, the ones that matter, the ones that may be going through silent struggles, and ask yourself if they are worth one more conversation, one more moment of patience, one more chance to understand. If you find this story interesting, please like, share, and subscribe for more.